Truth Barista is a production of High Beam Ministry and uses the imaginary Ersatz coffee shop as its platform to bring you a conversation about a plethora of scintillating topics. We don't shy away from any issue that is plaguing our culture or the church today, whether it's current cultural issues, questions about Bible verses, or even just some banter to encourage you. Dr. Jay Christensen is the Truth Barista, and he and amazing Larry Kutzler brew up highly caffeinated conversations for our day. Grab a cup of joe, plop yourself down in the booth next to us, and get ready to think. The Truth Barista is a production of High Beam Ministry, and it's listener supported. For more information about the Truth Barista, go to highbeamministry.com. Thanks for listening.
Remember when pride was a sin? Although that is merely a factual statement, because under the old rules, applicable even a decade ago, pride was a sin and had been recognized as perhaps the cardinal sin for thousands of years previously.
Thank you, Jordan Peterson. And then again, there is narcissism, a continuation of pride, a deepening of pride that destroys the very nature of the human individual.
The hallmark things of a narcissist are they lack empathy. They've completely denied their feeling self, and they will present this false self, and they will seem really confident, but the whole time they're like in terror. They're in fear that you are going to find out who they really are. Narcissists are not born, they're made. So because they lack empathy, they will manipulate people, they will seduce people, they will treat people like objects, they will abuse people. They are normally pathological liars, and they believe their lies. They make you think you're crazy. They won't ever apologize. They're always the victim. They will always twist something and be the victim. You're like, this self that's like, I'm smarter than everyone, I know everything.
No matter how you define our culture, we know it is not based upon truth. The lie is the greatest virus ever known to mankind. The lie has infected the church, the government, the educational system, and our media. Today, the lie has become so sophisticated, it cannot be distinguished from the truth. The message of the gospel is the antidote to the lie, and our goal is to expose the lies and present the truth of God's Word.
Dr. J, we've been in this small book in the Old Testament. In fact, you said last week it's the smallest book in the Bible. It's Obi-Dobi. No. Not Obi-Dobi. This is not Obi-Dobi. Where did that ever come from? Boy, I don't know.
A sick mind, that's where it came from.
Obadiah. There we go. There we go. Anyway, it was really good, and it's a small book, but you also emphasize the fact that it has a great big message, and we're going to talk about it more today, right?
That's right. In fact, in order to get a real grasp on this big message this tiny book has, we need to make sure that we're firmly sitting in the context. What was going on? And actually, this goes all the way back to the birth of Jacob and Esau. And then we're going to bring it forward to the time that Obadiah, which is the prophet's Hebrew name, which means servant of Jehovah, Obadiah. And we're going to bring it to his day, which is about 585 BC, 585 years before Jesus. And then eventually, when we get through the series, we're going to show you a really astounding fact that's going to explain a lot about a significant event in Jesus' life.
And I've been noodling through your notes and I can't find it. So you've really tweaked my interest of what that is. But before we even get into the text here today, let's talk about the prophets of the Old Testament. I mean, obviously, Obadiah is one of them. Why are they so important, and why shouldn't we spend more time with them? Even though their message was primarily to an ancient people, it still has relevance to us today, right?
Right. And the reason we should study the prophets, and by the way, they're divided into the major and minor prophets. That has nothing to do with the importance of the message. It's just how much material they produced. So you have the major prophets like Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, and then you get into the minor prophets like Obadiah, Jonah, Amos, Hosea, etc. We should study them because they are recognized mouthpieces of God. They were the ones who received God's thoughts and emotions regarding the issues of the day. Now, why does this pertain to our day? Number one, because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So the message that he speaks is an eternal message. Number two, the prophets are speaking into human situations. And as the old phrase goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So a lot of the issues that God was speaking to Israel about through the prophets are issues that we struggle with today. Faithfulness to God, showing our faithfulness to Him, not being distracted by the things of the world, not walking unjustly. And I mean, their messages are very practical. They're very to the heart. They're not deep. Well, they are deep theology when you wade through them, but it's not a mental assent, understanding type of a thing. It's like it gets to the core of a person's being. And so for the book of Obadiah, he is addressing a situation of pride. And as you and I know, pride is a major problem in every single person. So when he is addressing pride, and by the way, we're kind of in the vicinity of, at the time of this recording, of Pride Month, right? Pride in what? Pride in sin? I mean, pride is sin, but now you have people who are proud of their sin. So isn't that like doubling your indictment right there? So pride is a big issue, even among Christians. That is a major thing that we as Christians struggle with, probably more so because we're aware of it more and we actually care about it more.
Well, you go back into the story of Satan, Hasatan, right?
Yep.
Satan, the devil. It was pride, wasn't it? He wanted to be like God, and of course that doesn't work very well. You know, some Western sociologists are saying that we are now, in the Western world especially, in a narcissism epidemic. And they cite all kinds of stats on that. I'm not going to bore you with that. But it's just the fact that narcissism is a form of pride. It's probably what we hear more about today than just the word pride. We hear, even though you brought up a good point in the homosexual movement, that's pride. But in the movement of most people in leadership and other areas, they talk about narcissism. And narcissism is one of those things that's really hard to get rid of once once it takes a hold of your heart and your mind. In fact, Dr. J, I spent a lot of time interviewing people over the years, and I found that, and now this statistic is, I can verify it, but it's not scientific, okay? I just have to say that. But about 60% of the interviews that I did over the course of 4 or 5 years, it showed me that narcissism was in Christian leaders. And here's how I knew that. I knew it because they would always talk about themselves and what they were doing in their ministry, in their churches. Rarely did they say, God brought us to this point. God opened the door. God blessed us. It rarely happened that way. So I'm thinking there's got to be a little bit of self-serving recognition there in some of these interviews.
Well, exactly. And I think you hit on a really important point there because, let's face it, the middle letter of sin and pride is I. And the whole thing is I, me. Pride is what takes the worship song, "It's All About You," and turns it into the worship song, the self-worship song of "It's All About Me." I've dealt with narcissists myself. I've dealt with people who aren't narcissists, but just are really proud of what they're doing. We can be proud of and pleased with what God does through us, but there comes a point when we are pleased and proud of what we do, but it's wrong because we're looking at ourselves as the source of that or the accomplisher of that. We need to realize that God is first and foremost. He does use us, and we need to be grateful that He does, and we need to enjoy it. I mean, there's no sin in enjoying what God does through us. So
Absolutely. When
you're laying hands on somebody and God heals them through your ministry to them, rejoice. It's a fun thing. It's fun tag teaming with God, right? Coming off the turnbuckle to go after that cancer tumor. Boom! That's fantastic stuff.
I didn't know that you were, the Rock.
I tell you, when we lay hands on people, we do it with a full body slam.
I never heard that. That's great. I never heard that analogy before, but I guess it works. Okay,
I got to stay away from that because there are some healing ministers that do that, and I'm not improving that in any way. I'm just having fun. So, but here's the issue. Getting back to the text, Obadiah is about pride. Why? Because pride looks at oneself and says, I deserve everything. Everything is about me. It focuses on me. Everything is for me, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the problem that we need to reveal going into the context. So what I'd like to talk about probably over this session and our next time together is the context of the birthright and the blessing. We touched on it a little bit last week. But we're going to talk about the birthright and the blessing and where this struggle between Edom and Israel came from. Okay, so you ready?
I am. I'm ready to raring to go.
Okay, so here is the birthright issue. What is the birthright? The birthright falls to the firstborn son. It is the right of their birth as firstborn son to take care of the family. And as we said before, when the father dies, leadership passes to the firstborn. The firstborn is responsible for mom's care, to marry off any unwed daughters or to care for them for the rest of their lives, to oversee the hacienda, make sure that everything is working and everything is prospering under their hands. So they become the de facto king of the family. Okay, so the firstborn is the de facto king of the family. And you can kind of figure out if you're the firstborn son in a family of sons, you get the special favor from the father. Now, remember the story of Joseph, right? And his brothers? He's the firstborn son of the beloved wife, Rachel. And you had Reuben, who is the firstborn son of the not so beloved wife, Leah. But because Reuben was a firstborn, everything from his father Jacob was to go to him. However, Jacob tried to, quote unquote, pre-claim his inheritance by sleeping with one of his father's concubines. Now, the right of the father is that he can strip the firstborn status from the firstborn son and give firstborn status to another son. That's the father's prerogative. Well, that's what he did. It says in Chronicles that Jacob made Joseph his firstborn son. And we know that's the case because he lavished an expensive coat on Joseph. It was obvious Jacob was playing favorites. It was obvious he wanted Joseph to be his firstborn son. And this is what pitted the brothers out of their pride and hurt, and Reuben especially, to attack Joseph. Because if you get rid of Joseph, guess where the birthright would go? Back to Reuben. Naturally, unless Jacob chose somebody else. So let's back up a generation. Here you have Isaac and Rebekah. And Isaac and Rebekah, it's Abraham, Sarah. They have Isaac. Isaac marries Rebekah. Rebekah becomes pregnant. In her womb, the two babies are kind of wrestling with each other and fighting each other. And any pregnant woman would be going, oh, I can't wait till this is over. And so she seeks the Lord, and the Lord goes, I'll tell you what's going on. You don't just have two fighting babies in your womb. You have two nations in your womb. Both children will be the ancestors of nations, and these two nations will be fighting each other. So even from the beginning, there was this prophesied struggle between these two boys. Okay, so what happens then is that Esau is born. And as Esau is born as the firstborn, Jacob comes out holding on to his heel, as if trying to pull him back to gain the advantage, or just trying to hitchhike on his coats in order to get what's coming to Esau. That's the picture that's there. Now, what is the secondborn trying to get? Not just the birthright, but the blessing. Now, the blessing is important because that's the father's inheritance. Without the father's resources, it's tough for the birthright firstborn to fulfill his duties. And so the blessing must follow the birthright. The birthright must be accompanied by the blessing. So this is the cornerstone of this entire story. If you don't understand this, then it's just two grumpy young men fighting it out and their ancestors having a family feud. That's all it devolves down to. We got to understand the motivations here. Okay, so what happens is one day Esau is out and he's hunting and he comes back to the tent, and Jacob, his brother, by the way, his name Jacob comes from the word Akev in Hebrew, which means the one who grasps the heel or who trips his opponent up. So Esau is nicknamed Edom, because he had a red complexion. Edom means red. He had a red complexion when he was born. Jacob was called the one who grasps the heel. It's a name that describes their being and their nature. Okay, so Esau is kind of a hot-headed guy. You ever heard of somebody who says, I was so angry I was seeing red? Okay, that's Edom. Okay, he's a little hothead. He's the manly man, right? And Jacob stayed with the tents. He's not quite as athletic as Edom,
You like to knit. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. Well, he was definitely Rebekah's favorite, and Esau was Isaac's favorite. Okay, so Esau comes in from the hunt. Man, I am famished. Boy, that's some great smelling soup you made there, Jacob. How about a bowl? And Jacob, seeing an advantage, you can see one guy's moved by his stomach, the other one's moved by his brain. And Jacob says, sure, I got this bowl of soup here for you. I'll trade it for your birthright. Now, Esau thinks he's kidding, but because really, what's the birthright compared to a bowl of soup? But the thing is God takes us seriously. And it shows that Edom really wasn't all that concerned about carrying on the family heritage. And we see in his later life, he really isn't concerned because he marries outside of the family. So Jacob goes, okay, I'll trade you the soup for your birthright. What's a birthright to me if I'm dead? So he swaps it. Guess what? God honors it. Fast forward. Isaac feels he's at the end of his life. Now, he's an old guy. His eyesight's failing. His hearing is kind of failing. And he figures, I need to wrap this up. I need to make sure that I designate Edom as my firstborn who gets the blessing. So he prepares the elaborate ritual. Rebecca hears about this and she says, okay, this is what we're going to do. He's old and my husband's old. Yeah, I should say it like this. Your father's old. He's blind. Yeah. He's deaf. Mm-hmm. Now's our chance. Because you have the birthright, because Esau surrendered it, we're going to make sure that you get the blessing too, because I don't want Edom to be the guy that inherits everything. She's probably fearing for her well-being as well, because by that time, Edom had already married outside of the family. And you know how mother-in-laws are treated by daughters-in-law who are not really caring. Okay, so anyway, so they make this big meal, okay, and she disguises Jacob in skins. He's really, I'm just saying, Isaac's got to really be deaf and blind to mix this up. So she wraps him in a cloth of fur, and he brings the food into Isaac. Isaac eats and goes, oh, you must be Edom, because this is such great game. Oh, it's a great game feed. Come a little closer, because he has his doubts. As soon as Jacob gets close, Isaac grabs him, pulls him in close for a hug and a kiss. He goes, the voice is that of Jacob's, but man, you sure smell like the field. You must be Edom. So he blesses him. He gives him the blessing from the sea, the sky, the air, and the servitude of his brothers, et cetera, et cetera. And then Jacob lights out of there because he knows what's coming. Edom pops in with his meal and he says, I'm here. And Isaac starts to tremble. And he says, who took the blessing? Why is this important? Because a blessing once given cannot be taken back. And the father, Isaac, is feared he gave the wrong person the blessing at that point. Okay, so we're going to get to some text here.
Dr. J, it's interesting that later on, I think you'll probably talk a little bit more about this, but Esau was pretty mad. He was pretty hurt that he lost it, even though he treated it sort of disrespectfully in the beginning. So that sort of carried through the ages, right? So today we have the Arab nation and the nation of Israel, and even though they're family, they're kind of half brothers. This could go right back to this kind of discouragement by Esau or his anger against his brother, right?
Exactly. That's where it comes from. This is the baseline. Now, here's what we need to understand. God, from the very beginning, intended Jacob to have the birthright and the blessing. But the problem was Esau squandered it, and Jacob took advantage of it. And number two, Jacob, he's trying to wheedle for an advantage with this. And with Rebekah's help, he gets the blessing. Okay, this is Jacob's character flaw. God's going, I'm going to give it to you anyway. Why are you trying to manipulate to get what I've already granted you? Just walk it through and you'll have it. This is why Jacob went through all of the struggles in his life, specifically dealing with Laban, because Laban, his uncle, was a bigger conniver than Jacob was. And Jacob had to realize, I can't do this in my own strength, and I shouldn't do this in my own strength. I need to learn to rely on God. That was the issue with the sheep, raising the sheep with Laban, and that's why he wrestled with the angel. The wrestling with the angel was the epitome of Jacob wrestling. He realizes, I haven't been wrestling against people for birthrights and blessings. I've been fighting God over this. It's either his way or my way. The point, God was breaking Jacob's pride. That's the point. Once that was broken, the story now begins to shift to Jacob's sons. Okay, so let's go back. So here you have this birthright and blessing thing. Now, God knows he's going to give it to Jacob. Jacob, though, manipulates his way into getting it. So to the text, and this is in Genesis. So he said, and this is Esau, isn't he rightly named Jacob, the conniver, the heel grabber? For he has cheated me twice now. So the question is, did he really cheat him twice? No. Edom gave it up first. He did cheat him the second time. He took my birthright, and look, now he has taken my blessing. And then Edom asks Isaac, haven't you saved a blessing for me? But Isaac answered Esau, look, I have made him a master over you. This is very important because this feeds into Obadiah. I have made Jacob, Israel, a master over you, Esau/Edom, and have given him all of his relatives as his servants, and have sustained him with grain and new wine. In other words, he gets prosperity and rulership. What then can I give you, Esau? Now, what does this mean? Jacob is the master of Abraham and Isaac's household. He is the true holder of God's covenant promise and the line through which God's firstborn son, Jesus, will come. The firstborn son will have ultimate rulership over Abraham's people and the servants, the world. He will have all the resources he needs to govern the household of God and care for God's family as our elder brother. Jesus is the fulfillment of the firstborn with all the blessings to rule the world and for the world to serve him. See, that's how big this gets. Okay, moving on in the text. Esau said to his father, do you only have one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father. And Esau wept loudly. Then his father Isaac answered him, look, your dwelling place will be away from the richness of the land. That keys into Obadiah. Away from the dew of the sky above, because Edom, the descendants of Esau, the Edomites, lived in a desert realm. You will live by your sword, which means they'll be violent, and you will serve your brother. But when you rebel, you will break his yoke from your neck. That's what happens in the book of Obadiah. Edom has thrown off Israel's yoke with the help of the Babylonians, and now Edom is attacking the other side of the family. See, this has a huge cross-millennia influence. And as you brought up, the Edomites, coupled with the Ishmaelites, Abraham's son, these two sides of the family were the ones that lived to the east of the Dead Sea and to the south of the Dead Sea. These are Arab nations. You want to know where the Arab-Israeli conflict comes from? It goes all the way back to the split in the family line between Ishmael and Edom on one side and Jacob on the other. And what's it a fight over? The birthright, who gets to rule, and the blessing, the resources of the land. So this is, and really, if you want to go even deeper than that, it's all about the battle of the covenant. Who gets God's favor? And isn't it interesting that in Islam today, which came out of these nations, Ishmael and the remnants of the Edomites, particularly Ishmael, they have invented a God who favors them, not Israel, as opposed to the God who favors Israel and not them. See?
It's very fascinating, and you can understand then the fierce hatred between the two. They're family, they're brothers, half-brothers, but they just hate each other. Look at the violence that happens in the Middle East. And it's most Westerners don't really understand any of the things that you're saying, Dr. J. They've had no biblical mooring in this kind of theology, but it helps to understand it.
Right, and according to God, he's basically saying, hey, Edomites, Ishmaelites, this is in your nature. I mean, regarding Ishmael, he says his hand will be against his neighbor. So even the descendants of the Ishmaelites will fight amongst themselves. You look at the Arab peoples today, they fight among themselves. You know, and so really the only thing that is going to change the whole paradigm, and it's a human nature issue, Jesus has to change the nature of the Ishmaelites and the Edomites, whoever they are today. He has to change them in order to draw the family lines back together under the firstborn son, Jesus, with all of the blessings he wants to share with everybody in his family. Ephesians says, we have been blessed with every spiritual blessing in heavenly places. And when Jesus comes back, he'll rule from Jerusalem, but Israel will be the blessing and bring many blessings to the nations. In fact, if you look at Israel today, most of the Nobel laureates, a good third of them, are Jewish. Many innovations that we use today, cell phones, computers, technology, medical, agricultural things, came from Israel. God is pouring out blessings to the world through his people, the Jews, and through the nation of Israel. And yet you see the Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael, the descendants of Esau, and frankly, the rest of the world fighting against the Jews and Israel. Why? Because God has a plan to bring his firstborn back to earth to establish the family once again.
You know, Dr. J, I know we don't have much time left, but it would be an interesting commentary by you that when Jesus comes back and he brings, the family back together, is that the end of Islam?
I believe it will be, because Islam says that there is only one God and he has no son. So what you have then is Satan masquerading as the God who wants to be the head of the covenant over a people who want the covenant versus the God who is the maker of the covenant and his people who are rightfully owning the covenant, and it will not be withdrawn from them. God made an eternal covenant with Abraham, and it was passed to Isaac and to Jacob. It was not passed to either Ishmael or Esau. And so this is the nature of the battle. Once Jesus shows up, then the truth will be known. There is one God, Jehovah, and his son, Jesus. And through the power of the Holy Spirit and the infilling of the Holy Spirit, the world will become theirs and Islam will be cast down. In fact, I think you're going to see Allah's mask ripped off Satan. And that's in the book of Revelation, where you see Satan bound for 1,000 years. He won't be able to deceive the nations as many nations have been deceived by Islam. So there you go.
Wow. I mean, it's really an interesting study. And here it all started with this itsy-bitsy, book in the Bible, Obadiah. Wow.
Oh, we haven't even gotten into the bulk of it yet. But this is the background. This is, as you know, this is what is so important to understand because it explains so much. Why was Obadiah writing what he wrote? What was the scenario? What was happening? And we're going to get into that one shortly.
The Truth Barista is listener-supported and depends on the faithful gifts of people like you. The Truth Barista values the truth, so our conversations will always evaluate how truth impacts what we see or hear in our culture. To learn more about the Truth Barista, go to highbeamministry.com. Do you want the truth today? Dr. Jay Christensen is the Truth Barista and the founder of High Beam Ministry. Jay is a creative person who wants to use the setting of an imaginary cafe to produce a series of radio and internet programs that confront the issues of our day through the lens of the Bible. The Truth Barista was the avenue that was developed to communicate truth using the Bible as the source of our information. The Truth Barista is a production of High Beam Ministry and can be found online at highbeamministry.com.